Secretary General of the Party of European Socialists, as well as Deputy Head of the Group of Social Democrats in the Bundestag. I'd like to welcome you to this session on Europe in the 2020s. And as you know, the next decade will be decisive for Europe and the world as a whole. Our economies will have to undergo a massive transformation to face the threat of climate change, but also to provide decent work in the age of digitalization. Our societies and job markets will have to adjust to this changing world as well. Job profiles will change, new jobs will emerge. And I am sure they will be successful. We will be successful. However, I am equally convinced that we will need new tools to face new challenges. First, yes, we will need reforms, but the reforms of the 2020s cannot be the austerity of the past. Second, instead, we need substantial investment for the future to fund innovation, transformation and social cohesion. And third, we will need well-functioning and well-funded government institutions at all levels. So the past days have brought great news in this respect. The G7 agreement on a minimum tax for multinational enterprises is a huge step forward. It is a paradigm shift that underlines the importance of global cooperation. And it has the potential to end the race to the bottom between states that engage in harmful tax competition. I hope that corporate tax rates worldwide will be stabilized. This is in our mutual interest, and so I hope that today's success is the result of years of talks and negotiations. Global consensus for reforms can be built, but it requires stamina and conviction. Many have pushed for unilateral or at least European solution to tax the digital giants. Olaf Scholz has instead continuously argued for a global solution with a European solution as a backup if global consensus is not achieved. This agreement is a global success story, but also his personal success. Hard decisions and long negotiations require leadership and big picture thinking. In the next decade, we will need this kind of leadership in light of the challenges we face. One of the key questions will be when we move forward as European Union and when to wait and work for multilateral solutions, which are usually better but also require more time negotiating. And we have shown that we can move fast. In the past year, Europe has proven that it can act decisively. We launched the recovery program, Next Generation European Union. It has historic proportions and will allow us to build a stronger and better union, a union that delivers on sustainable growth for everyone, on climate change and on social justice. And I want to underline, to achieve this program, consensus building was and is the key, and France and Germany have a strong role in building this consensus, shaping the discussions on reforms and moving things forward. However, France and Germany and each other member state will only achieve true progressive solutions if the right people are in charge. Elections matter. Coalition building matters. In the past, conservative forces have been pushing Europe and the Eurozone to the brink of disaster. We have to do our utmost to prevent this austerity scenario from happening again. And we need convinced progressive and pro-European leaders to achieve this. With the presidency of Joe Biden, a multilateralist by heart and conviction, we now have the real window of opportunity to achieve progressive solutions in global cooperation. We should use exactly this momentum to build back better and develop policies for the middle classes on both sides of the Atlantic. In Europe, The areas of reform are plentiful and the stakes are high. They are very high. We need to strengthen the social dimension of Europe, transform our economy and create decent jobs for all. Common and better solutions are needed for topics such as rule of law and migration. In order to succeed, it is my firm belief that we have to act and to deliver progressive solutions and not only nationally, but on the European level and beyond. I am looking forward to the panel discussion and to the first-hand experience of Clément Beaune and Wolfgang Schmidt in achieving this. And therefore, I want to thank you. All the best for everybody of you and all the best for this discussion following ahead. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Post. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this panel at what has truly become a star-studded digital summit. My name is Katharina Gnad, and I'll guide us through this session, which is entitled Europe in the 2020s, Reinvigorating the Spirit of Reform. Personally, when I think of the 20s, I immediately think of the roaring 20s or the golden 20s. So the question really is, how can we make this happen? For this, I have two excellent speakers with me today to look into this. Wolfgang Schmidt, a state secretary at the German Federal Ministry of Finance, and Clément Beaune from France, Secretary of State for European Affairs. A warm welcome to both of you. We have 30 minutes, so rather than giving a long introduction, we'll do a Franco-German speed dating on Europe's future. I hope you're ready for this. It seems that we are slowly, hopefully, coming out of this immediate crisis, Corona crisis. And as Europe will be recovering from the social and the economic effects of Corona, there are still questions surrounding European integration and European solidarity on the one hand, and on European sovereignty and the question of whether Europe will be able to act at the global stage and will be able to face global challenges such as climate change together. So these issues are pressing over the next years to come, and I look forward to discussing this with both of you. So my first question is, one of the lessons of European integration is that Europe grows in crisis. We've seen this again last year with the EU Next Generation package. But the real question now is, how can we strengthen the European project in non-crisis times? We have several, what I would call slow-moving topics of big transformative topics that we need to address in Europe in the next decade. So my question to you both is, how can we sustain momentum for change in Europe once the immediate crisis has been over? Maybe first Mr. Schmidt, and then we'll move to Paris to talk to Mr. Beaune.
Yeah, thank you very much, and hello, Clément. I think indeed we see now a different scenario than in previous crises, when after 2008, 2019, with the banking crisis, and in 2015, with the influx of a huge amount of refugees, Europe was for years pretty much occupied with dealing with this crisis. And I think this time with the COVID pandemic, we took a different approach. And with Next Generation Europe and the whole idea of bringing up a solidarity element into the inner European relations, we really changed the paradigm. And we have now a situation where we actually not talk about crisis and crisis prevention or dealing with a crisis, but we talk about future, next generation Europe. So what is in for the future? And that is something that I think is completely different to other crises that we have seen.
I would like to push you a little bit further on this, because I think what we saw last year is really a rallying behind the European flag, if you want. But we all know that the devil will really now lie in the details of the recovery and the recovery plans and the question of how we implement these fast sweeping reforms that have been suggested. So the worry is that the next 2 years will actually not deliver on this grand expectation of the EU Next Generation package. And the question is, what can we do to sustain this?
I'm not that pessimistic. I'm more on the optimistic side of history. And my understanding is that every government understands the opportunity, but also the risk of this. I mean, if we show and showcase that this is working, that actually handing out grants with the idea of reforms and the idea of fostering the economy works, then there is hope for a future where others are more willing to do the same exercise again. And if we fail, then everybody knows that this really is a one-time endeavor. And so it is my belief that the different governments know what is at stake. And I think we have implemented with the recovery plans, with this process of tough negotiations and discussions with the European Commission, that member states actually do what they agreed upon beforehand, so that this is really building back better.
Okay, thank you very much. I understand that we have a problem with the signal to Mr. Bohn. So while we are hoping for a connection between Berlin and Paris, I'll ask you another question, and I'll ask the same question to Clément Beaune later when he has the chance to join us. At the moment, we're looking at national elections coming up in Germany, and we have an international audience on this summit, so there will be lots of people will be very interested to know first, what does the role of Europe play in the upcoming election campaign? Is it actually a topic, or is it a sort of non-topic that is taken for granted? And my second question is, very hypothetically, if you were to advise one of the candidates, or several, what would you advise for the next chancellor in Germany to pursue in terms of European projects going out of this crisis?
So first of all, yes, Europe does play a role. For example, Olaf Scholz has 3 keywords. One is respect, one is the future, and one is Europe. So it's one of the 3 items that he talks about, because he thinks that Europe actually is in the best interest and probably the most important national issue for Germany. The question is it only a Sonntagsrede, where everybody says how important Europe is and that we need to do more in Europe and with Europe. And again, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And the question at hand is, what kind of Europe are we talking about? So is it, for example, what we've been working, what Olaf Scholz has been working on the last 3.5 years? What about European integration when it comes to the banking sector, to make Europe resilient, to actually live up to the idea of a sovereign Europe that is not pushed around? That is the question on financial integration after Next Generation Europe. That is also the question of whether we go on when it comes to overcoming unanimity decisions. Is it only what everybody says in the field of foreign policy, or also on taxation? And are candidates willing to fight for that? And I think if you look at the big picture, everybody knows that there is a world emerging. I don't believe in only a G2 world, but yes, the US and China will play a crucial role. So where is Europe's position in that? And if we want to have a strong position for us, the only answer is the European Union. We alone, for example, as Germans, even 83 million, are not enough in this concert of powers. So we need the strength of the European Union, and then it is about very concrete policies. And so it will not be the item that is most discussed, I'm pretty sure. People are more concerned about overcoming the crisis, who pays for the crisis, will be worried about the future of the economy. But many are, especially in a country like Germany, with a high amount of exports, many depends on how Europe develops. And there are different ideas on what Europe should look like.
Okay, we'll come back to the policies in a minute, but I understand that we have Clément Beaune now with us. I hope the connection stands. So, Mr.
Hello,
Beaune,
sorry for being
welcome
late.
very
Sorry.
much.
Welcome.
Excellent.
Thank you.
We are very happy that you're with us now. we already started the conversation, and I can give you a sort of brief wrap-up what my sort of main questions were. The first one is really a question, and Mr. Schmidt has answered them already, and we can sort of join the conversation now. The question of how do we sustain momentum in Europe post-crisis? So the argument being that we have already sort of laid down a huge commitment in last year on Next Generation EU, and the question now is, will we have this sort of fatigue of European highlights and sort of face now a sort of dredging 2 to 3 years where nothing will happen, or whether you see a chance, and if so, how we can sustain this momentum for reform? And then the second question, and you can feel free to answer them any way you like, in any order. We were talking about the upcoming elections in Germany, and to you the question also the upcoming presidential election next year in France, these being countries which are very much watched all across Europe. So the second question is, what are sort of the main points in the campaign that you can envisage in France when it comes to the role of Europe?
Thank you very much. Well, concerning the first question, the momentum, I think we have, in a way, no choice, especially in the progressive approach of Europe. Of course, it can happen that there is, I don't know if it's a fatigue or it's a loss of pace and momentum. This can happen indeed, because we will have big challenges. You know better than me, dear Wolfgang, that it will be the case in Germany with the electoral period and the time afterwards to build a coalition contract. This always takes time. On the German side, it means under your control that if things are not stopped, they are necessarily a bit slower, and you cannot take the same initiative and commitment. And in France, we will have a presidential campaign right afterwards. So if you look at it from this point of view, it might be difficult. But I think we can also see it differently. I think we will have, whatever the results, a new German government, maybe before year end, for 4 years, with a coalition program and ability to move forward. And then a French presidency, not a presidential campaign, but a presidency of the EU. And we will have to work on a lot of French-German initiatives right at this moment, year end, early 2022. But to put it in a broader perspective, I think we made certainly a lot of steps forward during the crisis as EU with the recovery plan. Even if it was criticized, I do think with the vaccination common purchasing framework, I think it was a major achievement, actually, even if it was not perfect. But if we would not have it, now we would have countries in Europe with no vaccination, most likely. I think it would be a huge problem for all of us. So I think we did right in this respect. But let's be frank, the perception is not this one. Already for the crisis management, the perception is that Europe has probably not done enough, not done quick enough. So I think if we want to avoid that the crisis management is not seen as sufficient and the post-crisis management is seen as inexistent or insufficient again, we have to speed up a lot. I tend to say that Europe is on the right trajectory in many respects. I think on the fiscal side now, I think on the investment side now, I think on the health policy side also. But we are too slow structurally in a way, because this is our system. We are a democracy of democracies. We are a club of countries. It is structurally more difficult. But when you look at what the US is doing, in terms of investment post-crisis, what China will be doing, and other powers which are also our competitors, sometimes our allies, but anyway our competitors, we will need to go faster. So if we don't put, as we say in French, some coal in the machine, not very climate friendly, we have to adapt the phrase, but you see the meaning. If we don't pour some energy in the machine, we will have a huge problem, I think, and a political problem as well. I say it also from a French point of view, because if we don't demonstrate that Europe has done a lot during the crisis, which I do think is true, but needs to be better perceived, and Europe continues to do something, to be up to the challenge, and even to speed up, if we don't demonstrate this, we would have a big political issue, in early 2022. And this, I don't want to be too long, but has to be done through French-German initiatives mainly, even if we have to take a bit more time during this transition period, early 2022, to demonstrate that what we have done with the recovery plan, France, Germany, and the Commission and the EU27, we can do it again on investment, on fiscal rules, on industrial projects, and so on.
I'm smiling because I have a particular kind of deja vu from the Eurozone crisis. And I hear you and you say we have to go in bigger, that we have to do more, and we have to do it fast and strongly. And you have been in Berlin many, many times and have been in the ears and eyes of German policymakers. And this is no secret that the French government has been kind of frustrated with Germany foot dragging in the past. So we just heard from Wolfgang Schmidt that Europe won't necessarily be a big topic in the upcoming election in Germany. All the candidates are fairly pro-European. They have maybe different flavors to it and a different idea of how Europe should evolve. But generally they're pro-European, but it is not a major issue. And my question is, do you think Europe will become a battleground in the French elections? And the second question, follow-up question is, do you see a change in German perspectives when you look at this current crisis and what the Franco-German tandem has been doing and is doing to the Eurozone crisis?
Well, Europe will certainly be an issue, an item, battlefield in the upcoming French elections. Probably, if I may, and you will correct me, probably in a different manner and more than in the German elections, where I think all the big players are clearly pro-European, of course, with nuances or differences. In France, it will be one of the key dividing lines, but in a different manner as what we have experienced now 4 years ago in 2017, in the previous campaign, previous election, because the big change is that Marine Le Pen and her far-right party are not, or do not present themselves as anti-European. They were against the euro explicitly 4 years ago. They are not anymore. They were considering leaving Schengen, even considering with more caution the possibility of leaving the EU if some reforms had not been put in place, a bit like the Brexit approach pre-referendum in the UK. They are not talking about that at all. Interestingly, I don't know if it was seen in Germany, probably not, Marine Le Pen published an op-ed in the most liberal newspaper 2 months ago, I think, saying all this discussion about not repaying debts, asking ECB to do more and so on is nonsense. We need to repay our debts, we need to be serious in public finances and so on. Totally new narrative. But we will have other issues on which the European question and dividing line will be quite strong. Migration, I think, for sure. And one of the challenges for us will be to demonstrate that we are pro-European, that we have made some steps forward, that we have new ideas for the future, and to attack, if I may put it like that, Marine Le Pen on the fact that she's not formally anti-European, but that she's in a way non-European. She does not criticize the EU as much as she used to do. It's not the exit strategy, but it's very unclear, or I think inconsistent to see what she proposes. So it will be a different battle, but it will be a strong battle, probably more radical terms than in the German elections, I guess.
All right.
And what we can do with a German tandem is crucial, because in France, I don't know if it's different in the modus operandi as it is in Germany, but for sure, what we can do, France and Germany, is the demonstration that France and Germany can do a lot together helps a lot. The recovery plan last year, even before it was adopted, when it was presented by Chancellor Merkel, President Macron, it was a trigger, it was a game changer, because people thought, well, this Europe is able to do something, France and Germany are leading again. So if we can demonstrate that we are starting new initiatives, France and Germany, even if it's not totally implemented, of course, it will help, of course.
Okay, very diplomatic answer. It's crucial. The question is it a happy and productive relationship? And so maybe you can both give examples of sort of recent successes of this cooperation, maybe some of them that are unsung or unheard of in the public. We know about the meetings of Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron, which then sort of paved the way for the EU Next Generation package. But are there any sort of lesser known successes of this cooperation in the last couple of months?
Well, I would start with Next Generation. So if you mention Macron and Merkel, I would say, well, the work and also the convincing Merkel to get there was done by us. And it was hard work, I can tell you. And this would have not been possible without checking back with the French partners and discussing that. And this again was possible because during the last 3 years, we have been working extensively, very often up till 8 o'clock in the morning, both Olaf Scholz and his counterpart Bruno Le Maire, on various issues, very complicated, on the banking union. Might sound completely boring, but obviously a fiscal union, an understanding also where others are. And you've seen the split between the frugals and the South. And I think only this Franco-German tandem was able to actually make this happen by reaching out to the frugals, by reaching out to the Southerners and to the Easterners, and pave the way for such a consensus. And the latest example is with the G7, the agreement, and Achim Post mentioned it, of this global effective minimum taxation. This is something that is the result of a Franco-German initiative at both the G20 level and the so-called inclusive framework in the OECD that started in October 2018. And since October 2018, we have been working on that issue very hard with the G7 partners within Europe, but also with the G20. And there you can see that working together, forging a compromise, departing from very different places, actually delivers. But it needs time, and it needs an understanding also of where you come from and the capability to forge a compromise. And I think this is something that we have achieved together between France and Germany. And I would, because we have an election coming up, say Olaf Scholz played a pretty crucial role in that. And he's happy to continuing that, both after the German and after the French election.
Okay. One thing I would like you, Mr. Schmidt, to react to is I think Clément Beaune mentioned it twice. You both talked about fiscal union and this being a possible next step in reforming the European economic framework, if you want. Mr. Schmidt, you talked about banking union, and Mr. Beaune, you talked about fiscal rules. So is fiscal rule reform something that the German government would go along, or is that something where we would have to agree to disagree?
Well, it depends. I mean, it's foreseen that there is a discussion on the Stability and Growth Pact, and so the fiscal rules. Obviously, the discussion is not easy, no? And we have seen that with the different groups. And obviously, there is a difference in the position. If you have a debt to GDP ratio of over 130, you're in a different position than a country that has a debt to GDP ratio of 80. But that's Europe. I mean, and I think our position is we should concentrate on those things where we can achieve something, but we need to stay in contact and to be able to discuss all these issues. That's what Europe is about. It's not that everybody agrees, then it could be done by everybody. It's about bringing together different opinions and different interests, and at the end be able to forge a compromise out of 27 or in the Eurogroup less positions.
I put you a little bit on the spot, and I would like to give you the chance, Mr. Smith, to sort of reach out your hand to Clément Beaune and says, we would like to do X, but France is sort of a little bit hesitant about it. Isn't that a good time to compromise? What would that be, Mr. Schmidt, if you had to choose one topic where you need to convince the French?
I have no feeling that I need or we need to convince the French, actually. My feeling is that we are in a very good process and working on this together. No, and I think the challenges that we see for Europe, but also for our own countries, we are pretty much in line. And the good thing is that this is a constant process. So it's not that you have to meet at one moment and then you come up with new ideas. No, it's a constant process where all the partners know each other. And as you've seen, we were able, even in the most difficult situation, to come up with a solution that was pretty convincing to the rest of the 25.
Would you like to respond, Mr. Beaune?
Maybe just on the fiscal rules, not the easy one, but I think it's important because, especially with my colleague Schmidt, we discussed a lot on this, and I think we have a lot of shared views. I just want to insist that for us, it's not an isolated question. It's not for the sake of redesigning, reshaping the fiscal rules, which I think will be necessary, not because we don't need rules. We do need rules, not because there has been this debate for 20 years now, 15 years now, but because the economic situation is extremely different after the crisis, de facto. And when you look at the debt GDP ratio, it's on average a bit more than 100% in the Eurozone next year. So it's a situation in which the targets we have, the framework we have will necessarily be different. And I think if you just plug in again the same rules in 2023, it's just as having no rule, because they will not be efficient addressing the new reality. So this is first a pragmatic thing. And the second thing is that, as I said, it's not isolated. It's about, I think, growth and investment. How do we have a strategy for the next 10 years in terms of growth and investment? And it has to do with fiscal rules, certainly. We shouldn't have no taboo in this, and probably it's more an effort in Germany than in France, I admit. But we should also discuss about, do we have a different EU budget? Do we have a common investment capacity? We discussed it a lot, and I know Olaf Scholz has worked on it as well. Do we have industrial projects in common that we put money in? All that does count to define an investment strategy. I think it's a growth and investment strategy, and it's not a diplomatic way to avoid the topic of fiscal rules. We will need to address it. There will be proposals by the Commission, I think, anyway. So there will be a need for a French-German discussion compromise to start with, for sure, but not in an isolated manner, thinking that the fiscal rules are the end of the beginning of the story. It's part of the story.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I think we have the chance for one last question. And this is also a chance of bringing in issues that we haven't raised so far. So we all sit in different places, and hopefully next time we all sit in the same room. But this conference and the summit and the panel as well is about the next decade and to shape it. So my last question to both of you would be to sort of imagine all of us 10 years older sit here again in 10 years' time, in whatever capacity we will be then all be in, and sort of specifically look at the German-Franco tandem in Europe. What is the one project that in 10 years' time you would like to say, we've completed it, and we're sort of, this is the big project that we've done? You mentioned, Clément Beaune, investment policy, Wolfgang Schmidt, you mentioned tax policy, so there are sort of lots of candidates in the room, but if you had to choose, what would be your big signature project?
For me, it's clear it's to make Europe and the European Union net zero when it comes to climate. And I think people do not really understand the size of the endeavor and the challenge. I mean, we've relied on burning coal and oil and gas for 200 years to build up our industry and to produce. And now we have less in the case of Germany, because we said we're going to phase out and be net zero in 2045, we have less than 25 years to completely change the way we produce. And that is something that cannot be done alone in Germany. That is a truly European endeavor. And that is something that the next 10 years will decide upon whether we will succeed or not. And so this is, I think, the most challenging project for each of us.
Mr. Bohn, do you agree? Or would you choose another topic that we will then call completed in 10 years' time?
I do agree in climate, or could have quoted defense, but I would say space. Just for one reason, because I think we need, there are a lot of areas, social area, policy for the youth and so on, in which we will need to increase our efforts, maybe our budgets in the years to come. But I quote space first because I know it's sometimes difficult between France and Germany, but it's a good example of an area we need to cooperate more. And it's an area in which Europe has been the leader, can be the leader again in 10 years if we do it properly and coordinate our action, and also because it's a dream. And I think, maybe I sound French, but I think it's very important that we have a long-term project, plan, and dream. The Chinese, the Americans, in very different manners, they have dreams, and they are proud to go on TV and to go public and to say, we will do this in 10 years. Sometimes it's not realistic, but sometimes it works. Look at the vaccine. We don't dare having such perspectives and proposals and dreams in the EU and in Europe. And I think we need it. I think France and Germany can deliver it. If a year ago, I don't know if it was a dream for people, but if we would have said in this format, look, in a few weeks we will have a recovery plan, everybody would have laughed. And we were working on it and we made it. The carbon neutrality, we have to deliver, but even the common objective was a dream 2 years ago. Now it's a common objective, legally binding in the EU. So we need that. I think space is a good candidate for this.
Okay, so we have one Europe of dreams and one out of necessity to be carbon neutral in 10 years. And we might be able to compromise and sort of between dream and necessity, we might find a sort of common ground. Before we come to a close, I kindly ask those of you who participate via Zoom to fill in the feedback form. This will help the organizers of this conference to improve if there is anything to improve. With this, I would like to thank the speakers Clément Bohn and Wolfgang Schmidt and Achim Post very much for their time. I hope you enjoyed this evening's speed dating on Europe's future. And I wish you all a nice evening, and hopefully we'll see each other earlier than in 10 years' time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All the best to Paris, Clément. See you soon.
Thank you, Berlin. Thank you, Wolfgang. Thank you to you. Thank you.
Thank you.